An interesting summary, but why do the midterms matter? Well, Dr. Richard Johnson is a lecturer in US politics and policy at Queen Mary University, London, and he joins me now. Thank you so much for joining us. What are the midterms?
Well, the midterms take place every 4 years. They're the elections for the House, Senate, and state government. So that's governors, executive branch officers, and state legislatures. And they're sort of a midway point, a check-in on the kind of rating that the public have of the incumbent presidential administration. Of course, there are all kinds of local factors that go on, particularly when we think about the kind of state government races. But at the end of the day, in terms of how they're interpreted, they're often seen as a kind of check-in on the mood of the country with respect to the president and his party.
So very, at the moment, as it seems to be on a cliff edge, quite worrying for President Biden then?
Yes, although I think that these results are much better than was expected. So it is the historical norm that the president's party loses seats in a midterm election. Indeed, since the 1830s, the president's party has lost seats at every midterm election in the House of Representatives except for just 3. So it would have been exceptional if Joe Biden hadn't lost some seats in the House of Representatives, and the question was, what was the scale going to be? And by the looks of it so far, we haven't had all the returns in, the Democrats are not losing as many seats as many people expected. And it's quite possible that they won't lose any seats in the Senate, i.e. they might even hold on to control of the Senate. That's still to be determined by a few key states, but it's not a bad night in relative terms for the Democrats.
And I'm always interested when they say, oh, it hangs on the balance. Here is one state or the other, for instance, Pennsylvania or one of those. This seems to be a recurring thing.
Yes, and this is something that's actually a fairly recent development in American history. So we're in a period that some political scientists have called the period of insecure majorities. That's to say that the country is very finely balanced, very closely divided. And that's been the case for about 30 years now. But between the 1950s and the 1990s, the Democrats won control of the House of Representatives every 2 years without interruption from 1954 until they lost it in 1994. So there was this period of Democratic Party dominance in Congress that has now evaporated. And what we see now is the control of Congress goes back and forth and comes down to just a few key House districts and just a few key states.
The other big question, of course, is what does it mean for Donald Trump?
Yes, well, I think Donald Trump has not had a particularly good night. It seems that Republicans haven't done as well as people might have expected, partly because they have had a few candidates who are inexperienced and not particularly high-quality candidates. And these were often candidates that were pushed forward by Donald Trump. So to give an example, Mehmet Oz, the Republican who just lost Pennsylvania, even though it was a Republican-held seat, he was a television personality, a bit like Trump, and didn't have any previous political experience. So I think Trump might get some of the blame for what's happened here. And the other thing I think that's difficult for Trump is his rival, the governor of Florida, a Republican, Ron DeSantis, was re-elected very handsomely. And so I think that gives DeSantis quite a lot of credibility going into the Republican primary should DeSantis wish to stand for president and seek the Republican nomination against Donald Trump.
Of course, both President Biden and Prime Minister Sunak were at COP27, climate issues being on their agenda. But I'm curious about, with these midterms, what impact, why should we care here in London?
Well, it will mean that Biden will struggle to, assuming he has lost the House, it means he will struggle to pass major legislation. What I will say, though, is Biden has had a legislatively successful first 2 years, including a major climate bill, which was given the somewhat innocuous title, the Inflation Reduction Act. But what it was actually was a massive investment, unprecedented investment in green technology and retrofitting and so on. So he actually has a bit of a record to rest on. There's obviously much more that needs to be resolved in the United States. There's still not been any major legislation on say, immigration, for example. But and it's going to be tough for him to get that through. What it might mean, though, is he looks more to the international stage, where the presidency has more inherent prerogative powers that aren't reliant on Congress. So we might see a bit more of him outside of the US in the next couple of years.
And just finally, I wonder about the future, because there are rumors and they're swirling around, but obviously nothing is confirmed, that President Biden might already be thinking about rerunning, and possibly that might be against Donald Trump. How likely is that?
If you'd asked me even yesterday, I would have said that I think the most likely outcome would be a rematch between Trump and Biden. Given how things are panning out in these midterm elections, I think Trump's no longer guaranteed by any means the Republican nomination. It could be Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, against Joe Biden. I do think it's quite likely. I think it's very likely that Joe Biden will be the Democratic nominee, but I don't think we are as certain now that Donald Trump will be the Republican nominee.
Well, we'll have to look to the future and see what happens. In the meantime, Dr. Richard Johnson, thank you so much for joining us. Dr. Richard Johnson, lecturer in US politics and policy at Queen Mary University, London.